Christmas is a sad season and meant only for the rich. The phrase came to Cameron Nicholson in an instant after the crowd's murmur jolted him awake and named him for the amorphous depression that had plagued him all evening. Of all the millions of people in Florida, he was practically the only one who had decided to sleep early on Christmas Eve to avoid the mournful feelings of being alone at this time of year and the betrayal that he'd recently experienced. 1 month ago, Cameron was a wealthy pharmaceutical manufacturer in Texas, and he and his friend, come business partner, Nicholas, had been on their way to Florida for a business deal. Little did Cameron know it was all a dirty ruse to get him out of the way, and he'd be in a terrible state one day. The evening all this happened had started like any other. Nicholas had come to Cameron's house to discuss the plan. They had agreed to meet someone in the outskirts of Florida who would lead them to the city's central plant, where the pharmaceuticals they were interested in producing were manufactured. As Cameron and Nicholas approached the plant's outskirts, a man in his 30s approached Nicholas and asked him to exit their car alone. Nicholas told Cameron to stay inside. Nicholas and the strange man stood at a distance from the car talking about something, occasionally looking at Cameron and pointing to the building where they'd arrived. What are they even discussing? Why on earth would that man want to talk to Nicholas alone? Cameron's mind raced with the most bizarre suspicions at their sight. Suddenly, Nicholas's phone, which he'd forgotten in the car, rang, and a shock ran through Cameron. The wallpaper on the phone was a picture of Nicholas and Cameron's wife, Linda, kissing, and the contact that flashed across the screen was named Love. Is it possible this could be Linda? Should I pick up the call? Cameron was baffled. Nevertheless, he answered it, and his suspicions were confirmed. "Hi, honey, did you reach safely? Did you manage to get rid of that idiot Cameron?" the voice asked. Cameron recognized it was Linda. It was her voice, and the deal that Nicholas had organized wasn't a pharmaceutical one. It was all a plan to get rid of him, and Cameron realized it late. He immediately got out of the car and began looking for a way out, but 2 men, dressed in all black, stood in his way. Nicholas and the strange man soon appeared from behind them. Nicholas smirking, "I'm sorry, Cameron, I didn't have a choice. I'm hoping you'll forgive me." That was all Cameron remembered when he opened his eyes one day and found himself in an underground tunnel in the outskirts of Florida. His wallet, phone, and money were all gone, and one side of his face was covered in dried blood. It had probably been days since he'd been left alone there in the underground tunnel. He slowly left the area and climbed up, his head still throbbing from the pain, until he reached a highway where, fortunately, he soon encountered a kind truck driver who was on his way to the city to sell some of his produce and offered to give him a free ride to town, as well as the old blanket he'd been using to keep warm. Cameron somehow reached the city that day, but he didn't know what to do after that. His wife and his friend had stabbed him in the back, and he didn't have enough money to travel back to Texas. If he wanted to return home, he had no choice but to look for work and earn money. But everywhere he went for work, he was turned down because of his tattered appearance and face that bore multiple injuries. So Cameron had to ultimately beg for survival. The present day. Christmas was just days away. Cameron had already gotten up and clenched his fists around his stomach, attempting to quiet his growling and alleviate the pain he was feeling. He couldn't remember when he'd eaten last, but it had been days because he was frequently tired and had occasionally collapsed due to exhaustion. Considering it was Christmas and a kind soul would help him out, Cameron opened his overcoat and folded it several times to make a bowl-like container out of it. He helped himself with the old blanket he'd sat there and begging for food. "Excuse me, ma'am, can you please get me a loaf of bread?" he asked a woman who'd just come out of the Walmart store. She didn't offer him anything. Instead, she sneered at him for being homeless and then walked away. The second person that walked past Cameron gave him a judgmental look, and a few others pulled their kids away, labeling Cameron as a homeless freak, advising them to stay away from him. Poor Cameron's eyes welled up. He lowered his head and tucked it in the circle of his hands and started crying. Suddenly, a squeaky voice of a child interrupted him. "Please take this before my mommy finds out," the child said. Cameron slowly lifted his head to see a boy of about 7 standing in front of him holding a box of chocolates. "It's Christmas and everyone enjoys chocolate on Christmas. I hope you'd enjoy it as much as I do," he said with a smile. Cameron couldn't stop crying at the boy's sight. "Thank you very much, young man. You've no idea how much you've helped me," he sobbed as he accepted the box. "I have to leave now, otherwise Mommy will scold me. Bye," the boy said, preparing to leave. But as he turned around, he saw his mother standing behind him, her hands on his waist, giving him a stern look. "How many times have I told you, Tom, not to leave my sight? There are so many people here, honey, you could get lost." "But, Mom," Tom cried, "I was telling you something, but you weren't listening to me." "Didn't I buy the chocolates for you, Tom? What else do you want? Honey, you should know that I work very hard to support you. I already bought you your favorite toy and chocolates." "No, Mom," Tom said, "it's not about me. When we were coming to the store, I saw nobody was helping him, Mom, so I got the chocolates for him." Tom pointed at Cameron, who was holding the chocolate box in his hands and looking intently at Tom and his mother, Jade. "I'm sorry, I didn't know the boy troubled you for this. You can take it back," Cameron said, returning the box. But Jade refused and instead offered him help. "You look sick. Plus, you have so many injuries on your face. You can come with us and we can get you checked," she suggested. "Thank you," Cameron replied. "That'd be really sweet of you." With that, Jade drove Cameron to the hospital, where the doctors informed her that Cameron would need to stay for a while due to a head injury that needed treatment. Jade felt terrible for the man and decided not to leave him alone. On the way to the hospital, Cameron had told her his story briefly, and Jade knew how terrible his fate had been. Therefore, she and Tom spent that Christmas Eve in the hospital with him. After admitting Cameron, Jane headed home and later returned, bringing Cameron some home-cooked food. The poor man dove right into the food, then wrapped himself in the blanket Jade had brought him and drifted off. From that day, Jade visited him every day and looked after him. When he was finally released from the hospital, Jade took him home and allowed him to stay with him as long as he wanted. Cameron discovered that Jade was a single mother who had divorced her abusive husband. As they spent more time together, Cameron felt himself growing closer to Jade, and the two eventually fell in love. They tied the knot in a church and soon after welcomed a daughter. Cameron also joined a firm in Florida where he worked as a manager for a pharma company. Eventually, he returned to Texas to check on his business and discovered that it was on the verge of going bankrupt. Nicholas and Linda had squandered all the money, leaving them in debt and on the streets. Cameron flew back to Florida, relieved that his ex-wife and friend, who probably thought he was dead, had paid for their actions. And he began a new life with Tom, Jade, and their little baby girl, Angela, forgetting the ridiculous past and moving on with his life.